Welcome to another episode of How It Works with Holger, where Delphi is number one and Python is just a reptile. In the previous episode, I started talking about JSON. And in this episode, we'll dig deeper into another way to use JSON because we only looked at, as the next slide will show, in our first steps, we only looked at converting one object to JSON, which is called serialization. And we also did the reverse, deserialization, looking into how to convert JSON to object. And today, step number 2, we're going to make the object a little bit more complex. We're going to give the object a relationship. And this can be a list or simply a relationship to another object. However, the relationship to another object doesn't really change a thing because the JSON routine I showed you the last time is so smart. If it's just a relationship to another object, it's going to serialize that object as well. So we're actually just interested in looking at objects that have a list of other objects or a list of primary data types like integer and double. And I will point out two differences. We're going to look at the RTL again, how the RTL converts these things, serializes them to JSON. And then I'm going to show you a cross-platform solution that is contained inside of FNC Core. FNC Core is part of, or as the name says, the core of the FNC framework from TMS. And it has the advantage that you can use it for all the different platforms or frameworks that Delphi has to offer. And it offers a certain kind of serialization for objects that might be beneficial or has certain advantages because TMS puts some extra work here and there to make it even easier to create JSON. Let's jump right into the example that we started in the last episode. It allowed us to generate JSON from an object. It created JSON, and it was also able to convert that JSON back to an object. And today we're going to use a different class. The class is called Yearly Profits, and it stores for a year, signified by the property year of type integer, the monthly profits. And the monthly profits we're going to store in an array, and this array is going to be one item or element in the array will be for each month. Pretty simple. So element number 0 will be for January, element number 1 for February. Of course, you could make this much nicer using enumerated types and stuff like that. I just want to focus on the JSON here. Again, we'll have a class function that will give us a demo object by randomizing certain things. Let me start with that. So here we create a new instance and we are going to create a random year starting after 1979 and adding a random number between up to 40. And then here we're going to add all the profits, the fictional profits for the months 0 to 11. And you might think, monthly profit, there is no set length. Well, the set length is inside of the constructor of the class. This is where we define the range of the array. We make it possible to store 12 elements. 12 elements means we start at 0 up to 11. Of course, I could have also written low f monthly profit to high monthly profit. That would have worked as well. But in this case, I think the hard-coded is fine as well because the number of months in a year will never change. However, you could argue, well, maybe we'll go from monthly to a different unit at some point, but then you would also rename the property and rewrite the code anyways. So still, I want to show you this is how you could do it. Why is this underlined? F monthly profit is not accessible here. Of course, my mistake. We have to use result and result because that is our object instance. We are inside of a class function, meaning we don't have access to field values of the object instance only to class variables. And the class or the variable that we create here is result, which is also the return type of the function. And we create a new class of the class that contains the class function. That might be a little bit difficult to grasp at first, but then we can also assign values to the properties, and instead of f, we use monthly profit, the property, in order to go from the lowest index to the highest index. Okay, so we get an instance of t yearly profits using the example class function very, very easily. And that is the class, or the class that we're going to use to show how to convert an object instance with a list of items right here, which is an array. So let's have a look what this array looks like in JSON. Again, we implement generate JSON. And what do we need? We need a JSON string. So JSON of type string. We are going to use the RTL, so we don't have to define anything for that. What we need, however, is the object instance. So L profits is T yearly profits. And then we can create it using the class function we just looked at so in so much detail. So T yearly profits dot example. See, it's an alternative to the create constructor, and we use example, and the constructor is called inside of example. That is what you have to realize at this point. And of course, we have to free L profits in the end, L profits.free. And JSON is once again generated using tJSON. And then we can say object to JSON string once again. And L profits is our object instance that we want to transfer into JSON or serialize. And finally, we have to add it to the memo field so we can see what we actually generated. So txt results lines add L JSON. And that's all the code we need to write. So start in this, generate JSON, and that's what it looks like. So we have the monthly profit, and here's the array starting with brackets, and then all the numbers, 12. And then the next property, year, is just an integer number. So in JSON, an array is just initialized with brackets. And because the data type is in this case not another object, instead it's a double value, we just get a bunch of double values. Note that you can't really see it's a double value because there is no compound fraction or fraction anywhere. So what we could do in order to force that, maybe to randomly say divided by 3 and start it again. Of course, we have to quit this first before we can recompile. And from there, generate JSON. And now you see we have double values in there as well. No difference. There is no type difference in the JSON. It's just property and then the property value coming after the colon, starting an array, and then all the values of the array. If you had yet another object or an array of objects, that would be the same way. You would have a bracket and then an opening curly brace with all the properties of that object, comma, next object, and then at some point ending array. That's how JSON works. However, there is a problem with the Delphi RTL. I shouldn't say it's a problem, it's more or less something that's not nice. And I'll show you what I mean. The array is pretty fixed, of course, because we have to use set length and it's not variable. Let's change this to TList of double. And of course, we have to change that here too, TList of double. And the constructor changes as well. We also need a destructor destroy. and we go implement here, and we say f monthly profit dot free, and in the create constructor we say f monthly profit is TList generic type t yearly profits dot create. There you go, perfect. And now we have a list. So here we don't have the we could do a for loop from 1 to 12, for example, to create 12 values. And then we can't use the I anymore. Instead, we have to say dot add. And we want to add a random value. Let me get rid of the divided by 3. So that way we can add values to a list. And we expect this to work easily. So why do we get an error here? Let's see. The error says system. Oh, sorry, of course. The generic type that we store on the list is not the type itself. No, it's double. So pardon me, I'll let this in. Of course, I could have cut this out, cropped this out of the video, and you would have seen a perfect video, and you would think like, oh, he just types these things without making any typos whatsoever. No, that is quite normal. That sometimes, you mess these things up. And the compiler, that is exactly the strength of generic types. The compiler knows that there should be double values and not instances of a class. So TList double means this list stores double values. And you can see that here as well. If you invoke code completion where you add numbers to the list, so const value of double, and that is a generic list. And of course here the freeing of the list frees the list itself, and because it's double values, you don't have to free the items that are stored on the list either, because it's double values. Okay, so let's look what that creates. Running it now, generate JSON, and it's not what we expect or what I expect. So we have monthly profit again, we have year, that'll change obviously, but the monthly profit is now no longer just an array. No, it's an object, and that object contains the array. So the list helper is a field inside of TList defined in Delphi. So that is what happens. It generates a additional property value list helper and then lists all the elements that are on the list. It is still fine. It is JSON. You can read it. There's no problem with it. You can work with it. You can write a client that consumes that JSON, and you just say, hey, monthly profit has an object, and that object has a property list helper, and that list helper is an array of double values. So you get an additional level in the hierarchy that you don't really need. And what helps here is TMS, because TMS has certain implementations for TList, for example, in their implementation. I'm not saying TMS is the only framework, or the FNC Core framework is the only one that has it like that. Each JSON framework has certain implementations to serialize special data types like TList, T-dictionary, and all that stuff. I'm just giving you a very practical example here where you see that the serialization from the RTL might not be to your liking, and you say like, maybe I try something else. So at this point you have two options. Either you say, I'm going to get rid of the automatic serialization using tJSON object to JSON string. I'm going to do it myself. We're going to do that in part 3, where you learn about tJSON object, which allows you to create a JSON completely generically, or you give FNC Core a chance. So let's look into FNC Core. Different approach, I have to say, because FNC Core states that not the fields are being serialized, but published properties. And the reason for that is that when you look at object instances in Delphi, in the early days, published properties were the ones that were easily accessible. And now I think I've heard that before. Yes, you have heard that before, because if you look at, for example, here the form editor and look in the object inspector, these are all published properties. And that's how the IDE, the Delphi IDE, actually picks up all the things to list in the object inspector. It uses the published properties. And that is the idea that TMS had here. Well, we're going to use the published properties to create JSON. That's their approach. As said, each JSON framework has their own idea or concept. That's the concept of TMS. So the methods don't really need to be published, but I'm going to publish all the properties because those are the ones that I want to see inside of my JSON. Okay, we'll compile it like this to see if it still works. There shouldn't be really any change. And we have to use a unit here. So VCL, FNC types, it's called. And that brings some magic to the Delphi language, because what they do is they override certain classes and types. I shouldn't say override. They implement class and type helpers, I should say. And these type helpers allow you to serialize any object to JSON. And let me simply show it to you. So we have here, if we go to our generate JSON method, so this is all what we had before. And instead of calling tJSON from the Delphi RTL, you can now say lprofits dot, and then there is a JSON property. And this can be used in both directions. That's what makes it so cool. So if you want to assign JSON to it, you can simply say lprofits JSON is this, and that will then reconstruct all the published property values based on the JSON. You also have to JSON that you can add certain properties as a list that are supposed to be excluded. And so TMS doesn't use the principle of custom attributes. No, you can list the properties there. To JSON, same thing as JSON. I think JSON calls the method to JSON, to be honest. And then you also have save to JSON file and load from JSON file. Awesome. You can immediately create files if you want to store settings, for example. Really, really easy using this functionality. So lprofits JSON is the serialized object. So we don't need ljson anymore. We can get rid of that and simply add lprofits.json to the memo control. That's it. Still need to free it. And that should be it. Let's see. Good. Generate JSON. And there we go. And again, we have monthly profit. Here we go. An array. No extra information. Works out of the box with TList and a generic type. It also works great with tstringlist. So if you have a tstringlist, you don't get any additional stuff. It uses each item inside of a string list as a different element and converts it to an array in JSON. That's really, really great. It also adds something here. So when you go back to and use the from JSON method, that it knows which object class or which class to use if you reference other classes. So this type is something that FNC Core needs. All of this functionality is part of the FNC persistence. I shouldn't call it a whole framework, but feature. FNC Core has more to offer with persistence, and you should definitely look into it. I'm going to give you a blog post, a link to a blog post right here. really, really well titled with FNC hidden gems, because that is really a hidden gem nobody knows about. JSON persistence. And again, TMS gives you a great introduction how to get started. And the only thing that what made this post a little bit difficult was the complexity of the JSON. So if you never had heard about JSON, this is a little bit too complex, but now that you've seen how it works with Holger 1 and 2, you're ready for this article and to take in all the information, because if you derive your class from T-persistent, you even have more opportunities using different persistence methods included in FNC Core that are all covered in this great article. So I suggest you read this article. It's available on tmssoftware.com/site/blog.asp, and then the parameter with the question mark post equals 646. That is the FNC Hidden Gems JSON persistence article. That was another How It Works with Holger. I hope you enjoyed it. Please support us by giving us a thumbs up, by explicitly liking this video. And also, if you're not subscribing already, subscribe to TMS Software TV. And of course, your suggestions are always welcome. Send me your suggestions for future episodes. The next one will finish off JSON by creating generic JSON files using the Delphi RTL and TJSON object. Stay tuned for that and see you soon. Take care.